Blooming Hearts, a fantasy romance under the Sakura tree. The sky over the kingdom of Arindra was an ocean of deep indigo, studded with shimmering silver stars that hung like delicate lanterns in the night. Beneath that celestial canopy, the land stretched out in endless hills, cloaked in mist, as though the world itself breathed softly in its sleep. But within the heart of the enchanted forest that bordered the northern reaches of the kingdom, there was a quiet magic that never slept. The leaves whispered ancient secrets as they rustled in the night breeze, and the ground glowed faintly with the remnants of forgotten spells. It was said that those who wandered too far into the woods would lose their way and be swallowed by the enchantment that clung to the very air. Arindra had always been a land steeped in magic, its history etched in the flow of rivers that gleamed with luminescent water, in the wind that carried faint echoes of long-forgotten songs, and in the towering mountains that loomed in the distance like silent guardians. The kingdom's people lived in quiet reverence of the magic that sustained their land, but they also feared it. For as much as magic could bless, it could also curse, and the line between the two was perilously thin. In a secluded corner of Arindra, hidden away from the prying eyes of the court, there was a small, crumbling temple devoted to the moon goddess. It stood at the edge of a crystalline lake that gleamed like molten silver under the light of the full moon. It was here, beneath the ancient arches of the temple, that Illyria first felt the pull of destiny. She had grown up in the shadow of that temple, her days spent wandering the forest, and her nights listening to her grandmother's tales of star-crossed lovers, tragic heroes, and the endless dance of fate. Illyria was a child of the woods, her heart attuned to the rhythms of the natural world. She could hear the songs of the birds before they broke the dawn, and she could sense the shift in the wind that heralded the arrival of rain. But there was something else that set her apart, a quiet, unfathomable magic that pulsed beneath her skin like a second heartbeat. She had always known she was different, though she did not understand why. Her grandmother had once told her that some souls were born with threads of magic woven into their very essence, and that these souls were both blessed and cursed. It was on a night much like this one, beneath the full moon's watchful gaze, that Illyria's life changed forever. She had been gathering herbs by the lake when she saw him, a figure cloaked in shadow, standing at the water's edge. His presence was like a whisper against her senses, familiar and yet strange, as though he had stepped out of one of her grandmother's stories. He was tall and lean, his dark hair falling in loose waves around a face that was both beautiful and severe. But it was his eyes that held her captive, pale as moonlight and filled with a sorrow so profound it seemed to echo through the very air. She had known in that instant that he was not of this world. There was an otherworldly grace in the way he moved, a quiet power that radiated from him like the heat of a distant sun. He did not speak, but as he turned to look at her, Illyria felt a jolt of recognition, as though her soul had reached out to his and found a missing piece. It was not love, not yet, but it was something deeper, something ancient and unbreakable. In the days that followed, Illyria saw him often. He would appear without warning, always at the lake, and though they never spoke, they shared a silent understanding. She would sit by the water's edge, weaving garlands of wildflowers, while he stood watch, his gaze distant and unfocused, as though he were seeing a world that lay beyond her sight. She wondered who he was, where he had come from, and why he seemed so burdened by sorrow. But she did not ask, for some questions were best left unanswered. As the seasons turned, their silent companionship deepened. Illyria began to feel the stirrings of something she could not name, a longing that bloomed in her chest like a wildflower reaching for the sun. She knew it was dangerous to care for him, this stranger who seemed to belong to the night itself, but she could no more stop herself than she could stop the tide from rising. Love, her grandmother had once told her, was the most powerful magic of all, and like all magic, it came with a price. One night, as the first snowflakes of winter drifted down from the sky, Illyria stood at the lake's edge, waiting. She knew he would come, he always did, but there was a heaviness in the air that made her heart ache with foreboding. When he finally appeared, stepping out of the shadows like a ghost, she knew that something had changed. His eyes were darker than she had ever seen them, and there was a tension in his posture that spoke of battles fought and lost. Without thinking, Illyria reached out and took his hand. His skin was cold as ice, but she did not let go. In that moment, she understood that he was not just a wanderer or a lost soul. He was something far more dangerous, far more tragic. He was a prince of the Night Court, bound by a curse that had stolen his kingdom and condemned him to wander the mortal realm until the end of time. The curse, he silently conveyed, had been cast by a vengeful sorceress who had once loved him and been spurned. It could only be broken by a love pure enough to pierce the darkness that had claimed his soul. But to love him was to invite ruin, for the curse would not relinquish him without a fight, and any who dared to defy it would suffer its wrath. Illyria's heart ached for him, for the weight of his sorrow and the burden of his curse. She knew that she should turn away, that she should protect herself from the darkness that clung to him like a shroud. But love, once kindled, was not so easily extinguished. She had already given her heart to him, and there was no turning back. The days passed like fleeting petals on the wind, delicate and fragile, yet holding an unmistakable beauty. In the quiet corners of the ancient palace, hidden deep within the heart of the forgotten forest, Illyria found herself drawn to the prince. Not because of his unearthly beauty, though that alone could turn the breath in her chest to mist, but because of the sadness that lingered in his eyes. It was a sadness older than time itself, a sorrow that no words could heal. She could sense it every time he stood beneath the withered Sakura tree in the garden, watching the blackened petals that never fell but never truly bloomed. The curse was woven into every corner of the palace. Its walls seemed alive, sighing with ancient grief. Every mirror reflected not Illyria's face, but empty corridors where faceless shadows drifted silently past. At night, the lanterns flickered with blue flame, casting eerie glows that stretched like clawed hands across the cold marble floors. Yet none of it frightened her. What haunted her more than the curse itself was the growing ache she felt whenever she saw him standing alone, his gaze lost in some distant sorrow that only he could see. She had come to understand that the curse was more than just a spell. It was a living, breathing force that fed on despair, a parasite tethered to the prince's very soul. And unless it was broken, he would slowly fade, just like the petals on the cursed Sakura tree. But breaking the curse was no simple task. Illyria had scoured the ancient tomes in the hidden library, her fingers brushing over faded ink and brittle parchment. Every legend she read spoke of impossible tasks, of sacrifices made at the altar of love. And each time she tried to ask the prince about his past, about the curse that held him captive, he would turn away, his expression veiled by a mask of quiet torment. Yet despite the distance he tried to create, there were moments when the barrier between them seemed to shatter. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of crimson and gold, Illyria found herself standing by the lake that mirrored the heavens. The water was unnaturally still, as though time itself had frozen beneath its surface. She gazed at her reflection, wondering who she had become. The girl who had once lived a simple life in a quiet village now stood at the center of a magical realm that whispered of ancient prophecies and forgotten kings. A soft breeze stirred the air, carrying with it the scent of winter blossoms. She turned and saw him standing there, his cloak billowing like shadowed wings. There was something different about him tonight. His eyes, usually guarded and distant, held a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. A quiet longing, perhaps, or a hope so fragile it might shatter beneath the weight of his curse. He stepped closer, and for a moment it felt as though the world had stopped turning. The only sound was the soft rustle of leaves and the distant call of a lone bird. Illyria could feel her heart racing, but it wasn't fear that gripped her. It was something deeper, something that had taken root the day she had first seen him beneath the cursed Sakura tree. In that silent moment, something shifted. She could feel it in the air, in the way the cursed petals trembled on their branches as though stirred by an unseen hand. It was as though the curse itself had sensed the bond growing between them, and it wasn't pleased. That night, Illyria dreamed of fire and shadows. She saw a woman cloaked in darkness, her eyes burning with crimson light. The woman reached out, her lips curling into a cruel smile as she whispered words that Illyria couldn't understand. But she didn't need to understand the language to know the meaning. It was a warning, a promise of doom that would fall upon them both if they dared to defy the curse. When Illyria awoke, the air in her room was thick with the scent of smoke and ash. She rushed to the window and saw that the cursed Sakura tree was burning, its blackened petals turning to embers that drifted on the wind like lost souls. And beneath the tree stood the prince, his hands clenched into fists, his body trembling as though caught in the grip of some unseen torment. Illyria ran to him, her bare feet slipping on the dew-soaked grass. She reached out, but before her fingers could touch his shoulder, he turned to face her. His eyes were wild, filled with a mixture of rage and despair. She didn't need to ask what had happened. She could see it in the way the flames danced around them, feeding on the magic that bound him to the curse. The sorceress had returned, and she was stronger than ever. In that moment, Illyria knew that there was no turning back. The bond between her and the prince had awakened the curse, and unless they found a way to break it, they would both be consumed by the darkness. But breaking the curse would come at a price. She had read enough of the ancient prophecies to know that love was both the key and the weapon. Only a love pure enough to defy the gods could shatter the chains that bound the prince. But such love required sacrifice, and Illyria knew that the price she would be asked to pay might be more than she could bear. As the flames continued to burn, casting eerie shadows across the garden, Illyria made a silent vow. She would find a way to break the curse, no matter the cost. Because somewhere along the way, in the quiet moments beneath the cursed Sakura tree, she had fallen in love with a prince who was more shadow than man, and she couldn't bear to lose him. The final confrontation loomed like a storm on the horizon, dark and inevitable. Illyria could feel it in the way the wind howled through the empty halls of the palace, in the way the cursed petals clung to her skin like whispers of forgotten sorrow. The ancient prophecies spoke of a hidden power that could break even the darkest of curses, a power that lay dormant within the heart of a chosen one. But awakening that power required a sacrifice, and Illyria knew that the choice she would have to make would change everything. As she stood beneath the cursed Sakura tree, watching the blackened petals fall like tears, she felt the prince's presence behind her. She turned to face him, her heart aching at the sight of his haunted eyes. In that moment, she understood the truth. The curse wasn't just a spell cast by a vengeful sorceress. It was a test, a trial that had been woven into the very fabric of their souls. And the only way to break it was to confront the darkness within themselves and find the light that could shatter the shadows. Illyria reached out and took his hand, feeling the warmth of his touch despite the chill in the air. Together, they would face the darkness. Together, they would defy the curse. Because love, she realized, was stronger than any curse. And as long as they had each other, there was nothing they couldn't overcome. The night of the final reckoning arrived cloaked in silence. Not the peaceful silence of a calm night, but a suffocating stillness, as though the very air trembled in anticipation of what was to come. The moon hung low in the sky, its pale light casting eerie shadows on the palace walls. Every step Illyria took echoed like a heartbeat in the empty corridors, a steady reminder of the choice she had made. The prince stood waiting for her beneath the cursed Sakura tree, his cloak billowing softly in the night breeze. His face was unreadable, but his eyes told her everything she needed to know. He was afraid. Afraid not for himself, but for her. For the past few days, they had scoured the ancient texts, searching desperately for a way to break the curse without the ultimate sacrifice. But the answer had eluded them. Every prophecy, every ancient tale, led them back to the same cruel truth. Only a love strong enough to defy fate could shatter the curse. And that love demanded a price. One of them would have to give up everything so the other could live. Illyria had already made her decision. As she approached him, she could feel the weight of his sorrow, the silent anguish that had haunted him since the day the curse was cast. He had lived 1,000 lifetimes in that palace, trapped in an endless cycle of despair, watching as everyone he had ever loved faded away, leaving him alone in the darkness. And now, for the first time in centuries, he had found a love so deep, so pure, that it had awakened something long forgotten, a hope that he had once believed lost forever. But that hope was fragile, and Illyria knew that if they hesitated, if they allowed fear to take root, the curse would win. Without a word, she reached out and took his hand, intertwining her fingers with his. Together, they stepped beneath the cursed Sakura tree, its blackened branches creaking ominously above them. The air was thick with magic, pulsing with dark energy that seemed to writhe and twist around them like unseen serpents. In the center of the garden, a circle of ancient runes glowed with an eerie blue light. It was here that the curse had been cast, and it was here that it would be broken, or strengthened beyond redemption. Illyria could feel the power of the runes tugging at her soul, whispering promises of eternal bliss if she would only surrender, if she would only give in to the darkness. But she didn't listen. She focused instead on the warmth of the prince's hand, on the steady beat of his heart beneath her fingertips. He was her anchor, her light in the darkness, and as long as they were together, she knew they could overcome anything. As they stepped into the circle, the air shimmered, and the ground beneath their feet seemed to tremble. A low, guttural laugh echoed through the garden, and Illyria felt a chill run down her spine. She knew that voice. It was the voice of the sorceress, the one who had cast the curse all those centuries ago. From the shadows, the sorceress emerged, her crimson eyes glowing like embers in the darkness. She was beautiful in a cold, otherworldly way, with hair as black as midnight and a smile that could freeze the blood in your veins. Her gaze flicked from Illyria to the prince, and her smile widened. "So," she said, her voice like silk and steel, "you've come to break the curse. How noble, how foolish." Illyria didn't respond. She knew that the sorceress fed on fear and on doubt, and she refused to give her that power. Instead, she stepped closer to the prince, drawing strength from his presence. The sorceress laughed again, a sound that sent shivers down Illyria's spine. "Do you really think your love is strong enough to defy me? I have bound this curse with blood and fire, with the very essence of darkness itself. There is no breaking it without sacrifice." Illyria lifted her chin, meeting the sorceress's gaze with unwavering determination. "Then we will sacrifice," she thought, though she did not speak the words aloud. She knew what had to be done, and she was ready. The sorceress's smile faltered, as though she had sensed Illyria's resolve. "Very well," she said, her voice soft and dangerous. "Let us see if your love is truly strong enough." With a wave of her hand, the sorceress unleashed a torrent of dark magic. It swirled around them, a maelstrom of shadow and fire, tearing at their clothes and skin, whispering promises of power and despair. Illyria could feel it clawing at her soul, trying to drag her into the abyss, but she held on to the prince's hand, refusing to let go. And then she felt it, a spark of light deep within her chest, a warmth that grew stronger with every heartbeat. It was the power the ancient prophecies had spoken of, the hidden magic that could break even the darkest of curses. But to awaken it fully, she knew she would have to make the ultimate sacrifice. Tears filled her eyes as she turned to the prince, her heart breaking at the thought of leaving him. But she knew that this was the only way. She had been chosen for this moment, and she would not falter. Summoning every ounce of courage, she stepped forward, placing herself between the prince and the sorceress. She could feel the darkness pressing in on her, but she didn't waver. Instead, she closed her eyes and let the light within her bloom, filling her body with warmth and power. The sorceress screamed, a sound of rage and fear as the light burst from Illyria's chest, shattering the darkness and dissolving the cursed runes. The garden was bathed in golden light, and for a moment, everything was still. When Illyria opened her eyes, she saw the prince staring at her, his eyes filled with love and sorrow. She could feel her strength fading, her body growing lighter, as though she were dissolving into the light itself. But she didn't feel afraid. She knew that her sacrifice had broken the curse, and that the prince was free. As the light enveloped her, she smiled, knowing that their love had triumphed over darkness, and that even though her time in this world was ending, Their souls would be forever entwined. And as she faded into the light, she heard his voice, soft and broken, whispering her name like a prayer. The curse was broken. When the light finally faded, the garden stood in silence. The air was clear, no longer heavy with dark magic, and the cursed Sakura tree, once withered and blackened, now stood in full bloom. Its petals, soft and pink as dawn's first blush, drifted gently to the ground, carried by a breeze that whispered of renewal and peace. The palace itself seemed to breathe again, its walls gleaming with a golden light that hadn't been seen in centuries. But the prince didn't notice any of it. He stood frozen in the center of the garden, his eyes fixed on the spot where Illyria had stood only moments before. His hand was still outstretched as though trying to reach for her, but she was gone, her body consumed by the light that had shattered the curse and saved him. The weight of her absence crushed him, and he fell to his knees, his heart shattering into 1,000 pieces. The curse that had bound him for so long had finally been lifted, but the price had been too great. He was free, but he had lost the one person who had taught him how to hope, how to love, and how to live. Time seemed to blur as he knelt there beneath the blooming Sakura tree, lost in grief. He didn't know how long he stayed like that, but eventually, he felt a soft touch on his shoulder, a touch as gentle as a whisper. He looked up and saw that the garden was no longer empty. Around him, figures were emerging from the shadows. People who had once been trapped by the curse, their souls bound to the palace. They were free now, their faces glowing with gratitude and joy. But their joy only deepened his sorrow, because the one who had saved them, the one who had given everything to break the curse, was gone. As the freed souls drifted away, returning to the lives they had once lost, the prince remained beneath the Sakura tree, his heart aching with the weight of his loss. The sun rose and set, days turning into nights, but he didn't move. He couldn't. The world felt empty without her. But then one morning something changed. He awoke to the sound of laughter, soft, melodic, and achingly familiar. His heart leapt and he turned toward the Sakura tree, his breath catching in his throat. Beneath its blooming branches stood a figure bathed in golden light. Her hair shimmered like spun silk, and her eyes, bright and filled with love, were fixed on him. He stumbled to his feet, his heart racing as he took a hesitant step toward her. For a moment he was afraid that she was just a dream, a figment of his grief-stricken mind. But when he reached out, his hand brushed against hers, and he felt the warmth of her touch. "You came back," he whispered, though his voice was hoarse with unshed tears. She smiled, a smile that lit up the entire garden. "I was never truly gone," her gaze seemed to say. "Our love is stronger than any curse, stronger than life or death itself." And in that moment, the prince understood. The sacrifice she had made had not been the end. It had been a transformation. Her soul, pure and radiant, had become one with the magic of the garden, with the ancient power that had once been twisted by darkness, but was now filled with light. She had become a guardian of the realm, a being of magic and love, and as long as the Sakura tree bloomed, she would be with him. Tears filled his eyes, but this time they were tears of joy, of gratitude. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as though he would never let go, and she wrapped her arms around him, her touch as real and as warm as it had ever been. Together they stood beneath the blooming Sakura tree, their hearts entwined, their love eternal. The curse had been broken, the darkness vanquished, and though their journey had been filled with sorrow and sacrifice, it had led them to this moment, a moment of peace, of hope, of forever. And as the petals drifted down around them, painting the garden in hues of pink and gold, the prince and Illyria knew that they had found their happily ever after, not in the way they had imagined, but in a way that was even more beautiful. Because true love, they realized, was not bound by time or space. It was a force that could shatter curses, defy fate, and create miracles. And as long as they had each other, they would never be apart. The Sakura tree bloomed on, its petals falling like blessings upon the garden, a testament to a love that had conquered the darkness and found the light. Forever.